Welcome to your favorite channel, the channel where reality TV's untold truths are revealed layer by layer. Tonight's story isn't just about love. It's about sacrifice, betrayal, and a choice that cost everything. For years, fans of 90 Day Fiancé believed they knew the full story of Jenny Slatin and Sumit Singh. A cross-cultural love that survived an age gap, secrets, and endless public judgment. But what the cameras never fully showed was the quiet war happening behind closed doors. A war inside one home. A war between a wife and a mother. A war that forced one man to choose between the woman he loved and the family that raised him. False accusations. A mother's ultimatum. And a decision so extreme that it ended their life in India forever. This is not gossip. This is not rumor. This is the story of how Jenny Slatin and Sumit Singh lost everything they owned, walked away from 90 Day Fiancé, and disappeared from the life the world knew, all in search of peace far away. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear changes everything. The conflict began with a single accusation. One claim that would ignite chaos inside the Singh household. Jenny Slatin, the American wife who had fought for years to be accepted by Sumit's family, suddenly found herself accused of something she had never done. Sumit's mother claimed that while Sumit was away, Jenny had misbehaved and even assaulted her. The accusation was shocking, not only because it was false, but because it struck at the heart of Jenny's long struggle for acceptance. For years, she had endured criticism, rejection, and constant tension. Now, she was being painted as violent and disrespectful. Jenny was devastated. She had always tried to stay calm and respectful, even when faced with open hostility. Being accused of assaulting her mother-in-law was humiliating and deeply painful. She believed the accusation was meant to push Sumit away from her and force him to choose his family over his wife. Sumit was caught in the middle. He knew Jenny. He knew she would never hurt his mother. But in Indian culture, a mother's words carry immense weight. To question her is often seen as betrayal. The accusation spread quickly. Relatives talked. Neighbors whispered. Gossip filled the community. Jenny felt isolated, her reputation damaged, and her marriage under attack. For Sumit, the pressure became unbearable. He loved Jenny, but the fragile balance he tried to keep between his wife and his family was collapsing. That false accusation was more than a lie. It was the spark that set everything on fire. Then came the ultimatum. In front of relatives, neighbors, and family friends, Sumit's mother looked directly at her son and said, "If you don't divorce your wife, Jenny Slatin, you are no longer my son. I cannot accept you as my child." The words were brutal. For Sumit, it felt like the ground disappeared beneath his feet. His mother's voice carried tradition, authority, and cultural power. In many Indian families, a mother's acceptance is sacred. Losing it can mean losing your identity. Jenny stood frozen. She had faced rejection before, but this was different. This wasn't disapproval. This was exile. She was being blamed as the woman who stole a son from his mother. Sumit's father remained silent, his face heavy with disappointment. Relatives whispered among themselves. Some supported the mother. Others quietly sympathized with Jenny but said nothing. The atmosphere was suffocating. Sumit was breaking. To choose his mother meant losing Jenny. To choose Jenny meant losing his family. The words echoed in his mind. "You are no longer my son." The ultimatum didn't stay private. Neighbors talked. The community judged. Soon, fans of 90 Day Fiancé began hearing about the family conflict online. The couple who had fought so hard for love now faced an impossible choice. Jenny tried to comfort Sumit. She reminded him of everything they had already survived. But the ultimatum planted deep despair. Could their marriage survive total family rejection? Could Sumit live knowing he was disowned? This was the breaking point. Days passed, and Sumit became silent and distant. He replayed every moment of his life with Jenny. The lies, the sacrifices, the battles they fought just to be together. Everything now felt fragile. Jenny watched him fall apart. She understood his guilt, his fear, and his pain. In Indian culture, family ties are everything. Being cast out means losing community, support, and identity. But leaving Jenny was unthinkable. She wasn't just his wife. She was his partner, the woman who crossed the world for him, the one who stood by him when no one else did. Friends offered little help. Some told him to obey his mother. Others admitted the ultimatum was cruel but refused to challenge tradition. Sumit felt completely alone. Jenny carried her own pain. She was blamed unfairly, accused of lies, and treated like an enemy. She had built a life in India for Sumit, only to feel unwanted at every turn. Losing him now would destroy her. The pressure became relentless. Every visit to the family ended in confrontation. The demand never changed. Divorce Jenny, or you are no longer my son. The words poisoned every quiet moment they shared. Sumit finally realized the truth. No matter what he chose, someone would be hurt. His mother had forced him into an impossible corner, and the weight of that choice was crushing him. This was the moment where love and loyalty collided, and the only path forward was freedom, even if it meant leaving everything behind. She had crossed oceans to be with Sumit, endured years of doubt, and fought for her place in his life. Yet no matter how much love Jenny showed, she was always painted as the villain. The false accusation of assault had already damaged her reputation, and now the ultimatum threatened to erase her marriage completely. Sumit was breaking under the pressure. His love for Jenny never wavered, but the guilt of going against his mother slowly consumed him. He tried to reason with her, begged for acceptance, and hoped for compromise. Every attempt ended the same way, with rejection. The emotional strain became unbearable. He stopped sleeping. He lost his sense of peace. Slowly, he began to lose hope. Both Jenny and Sumit started to realize this was not a temporary conflict. This was not something that would fade with time. It was permanent. Jenny would always be resented, and Sumit's loyalty would always be questioned. The family's demands crossed into cruelty, leaving them with no path forward except escape. One evening, after yet another painful confrontation, Jenny and Sumit sat together in silence. The weight of everything pressed down on them. In that quiet moment, clarity finally came. They could not live like this anymore. The accusations, the hostility, the constant pressure, it was destroying them. Sumit finally spoke, his voice heavy but firm. He said they had to leave. If they stayed, they would never have peace. Jenny nodded, tears filling her eyes, knowing he was right. Their love had survived countless obstacles, but this feud made one thing clear. To protect their marriage, they would have to sacrifice everything else. The breaking point had arrived. After weeks of relentless conflict, false accusations, and the crushing ultimatum from Sumit's mother, Jenny Sladden and Sumit Singh knew they could no longer endure the chaos. Their love had survived many storms, but peace would never exist if they stayed in India Point one evening. They sat together in their living room. The silence was heavy. The walls that once held laughter now felt suffocating, weighed down by years of rejection and hostility. Jenny looked at Sumit with sorrow and determination and quietly said they could not live like this anymore. Sumit nodded. He had tried everything. He had pleaded with his mother, reasoned with relatives, and endured humiliation in hopes of reconciliation. Nothing worked. The ultimatum made the truth impossible to ignore. His family would never accept Jenny, and their marriage would always be under attack. Together, they began to discuss the unthinkable, leaving India behind. It was not an easy decision. India was Sumit's homeland, the place of his childhood, memories, and traditions. For Jenny, it was the country she had embraced for love, giving up comfort and familiarity to build a life with him. But both knew that staying meant endless pain. The idea of starting over somewhere else brought a small sense of hope. Australia became their destination, far from the feud, far from judgment, a place where they could live freely as husband and wife. It was a chance to rebuild and finally choose peace. The decision was painful, but it was also freeing. Jenny and Sumit realized that love sometimes requires sacrificing not each other, but the ties that threaten to destroy it. That night, they made a pact. They would sell everything, the house, their belongings, their connection to the life they had built. They would start over completely. The decision was final. Once the choice was made, there was no turning back. To leave India, they had to sever every tie, emotionally and financially. the house they built together, the possessions they collected over the years, even the small comforts filled with memories. All of it had to go. The process began quietly. Sumit contacted real estate agents and explained that the house needed to be sold quickly, but fairly. The home, located in a busy neighborhood, had once symbolized their strength. Now, it represented their escape. Buyers toured the house, unaware of the emotional weight behind the sale. For Jenny, watching strangers walk through the rooms was heartbreaking. Every corner held memories, laughter, arguments, reconciliation, and dreams. But the house was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a reminder of constant conflict. After weeks of negotiations, the property sold for $1.2 million. The amount was more than they expected and gave them a sense of security for the future. With the house sold, they began selling everything else: furniture, vehicles, and personal items. Some were sold, others donated. Nothing was kept. They wanted a clean slate, free from the shadows of the past. The sale marked a turning point. For the first time in years, Jenny and Sumit felt a sense of control return to their lives. The feud, the accusations, and the ultimatum had pushed them here. Selling everything was their way of reclaiming their future. Still, the pain remained. Jenny cried as she packed the last belongings, realizing she was leaving behind not just a home, but an entire chapter of her life. Sumit felt the heavy weight of leaving his homeland, but both knew the sacrifice was necessary. With their finances settled and their possessions gone, they prepared for the final step: saying goodbye to India. For Sumit, it was the land of his childhood where every street carried memories. For Jenny, it was the country she had embraced for love, despite rejection and hardship. Now they stood at the edge of departure, knowing nothing would ever be the same. In the days before their flight, Jenny walked through the empty house one last time. The rooms echoed with silence. She touched the walls and whispered goodbye. This had been their home, but it was time to let go. Sumit's farewell was even heavier. He visited familiar places: the tea stalls where he once spent afternoons with friends, the temple where he prayed for strength, the streets that shaped his youth. Each goodbye felt like a wound, but the family conflict made one thing clear: India was no longer a place of peace for them. Their departure was quiet. Sumit's mother refused to see them. Relatives kept their distance. Only a few close friends came to say goodbye, offering soft words of support and wishing them peace. At the airport, emotions overflowed. Jenny held Sumit's hand tightly as they prepared to leave behind everything they had known. As they boarded their flight to Australia, the reality of their choice became undeniable. News of their departure spread quickly. Fans learned that Jenny and Sumit had left India for good. Some praised their courage. Others mourned the end of their journey on television. As the plane lifted into the sky, they watched India disappear beneath the clouds. It was a farewell filled with pain, but also with hope. When the plane landed in Sydney, it felt like stepping into a new world. The air was different, the city unfamiliar. The weight of years of turmoil slowly began to lift. For the first time in a long time, Jenny and Sumit felt free. Stepping onto Australian soil, Jenny and Sumit felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. The air was crisp, the streets bustling, and the skyline unfamiliar. Every sight, every sound, reminded them they were far from the life they had known. Yet, the weight of India's hostility began to lift. For the first time in years, they could breathe without fear of judgment, gossip, or ultimatums. Their first days in Sydney were quiet. They rented a small apartment, enough to begin again, to find their footing in a city full of strangers. Jenny marveled at the diversity and energy around them, her eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and awe. Sumit was quieter, introspective, still haunted by the years of conflict he had endured at home. He missed India deeply, the streets, the friends, the familiarity, but he knew that staying there had meant living in constant fear. They spent hours talking about their dreams, plans, and fears. The conversation always circled back to the future. How could they rebuild a life from scratch? How could they replace the family, the community, the home they had left behind? Jenny reminded him gently that love had carried them this far. If it had survived India, it could survive anywhere. Sumit nodded, but the shadows of the past lingered in his eyes. Money was the first hurdle. The $1.2 million from the house in India gave them a financial cushion, but starting over meant being practical. They had to find work, learn new systems, and navigate a foreign culture while protecting their peace. Sumit started looking for opportunities that could support them, drawing on his experience and skills. Jenny, ever resilient, began searching for ways to rebuild her life independently, knowing it was important for both their stability and their confidence. Even in this new beginning, the past followed them in small, subtle ways. Messages from relatives occasionally surfaced, reminders of the life they had left behind. Social media buzzed with fans speculating about their choices. Jenny sometimes felt the sting of judgment, but in these moments, Sumit reminded her why they had come here. No one could dictate their happiness now. No one could dictate their love. Days turned into weeks. They began exploring the city together, holding hands as if claiming the world as their own. Jenny loved the markets, the cafes, the parks, the ocean, the sense of freedom in being unknown, unjudged. Sumit found solace in routine. Morning walks, quiet evenings, and discovering corners of the city that reminded him life could be simple again. Slowly, their laughter returned. Slowly, the tension that had gripped them for years began to loosen. But rebuilding life was not just about freedom. It was about identity. Both of them had lost more than possessions. They had left behind the very sense of home they had known. Jenny often thought about the house they had sold, the furniture, the memories embedded in every wall. Sumit thought about his childhood streets, the temples, the festivals, and the meals his family had shared. There was grief in leaving, a quiet mourning that sometimes fell over them at night. They learned quickly that building a new life meant facing challenges together. Renting their first apartment was a trial of patience. Language barriers and cultural differences presented small frustrations. Bureaucracy, paperwork, and city systems tested their endurance. But each time they solved a problem together, their confidence grew. They were not victims of circumstance. They were survivors, capable of navigating the world on their own terms. One afternoon, as they walked along the beach, Jenny spoke about her vision for the future. She wanted to start a small business, perhaps something creative, something that reflected her passion and personality. Sumit listened carefully, nodding. He, too, wanted to contribute. The idea of working together, creating something from nothing, energized them. This was their chance not just to survive, but to thrive. In Australia, Jenny and Sumit also discovered the importance of community, but in a very different way than they had known. They met neighbors, made new friends, and slowly began building a network of support. These connections were not forced by obligation or tradition, they were chosen. This was a community built on acceptance, not judgment. It was a concept they had never fully experienced before, and it was liberating. Despite the relief of their new life, there were still moments when the pain of the past surfaced. Jenny sometimes woke in the middle of the night, haunted by memories of rejection, the public accusations, and the ultimatum that had forced them away. Sumit carried his own regrets about leaving his family, about the life he had once imagined. But instead of letting these feelings destroy them, they talked. They shared their fears and disappointments openly. They held each other accountable for the love they had promised to protect. Gradually, the rhythm of their new life began to take shape. Jenny opened a small boutique, selling handmade crafts and personalized items. The shop became more than a business. It became a symbol of her independence, her resilience, and the new chapter she had fought so hard to write. Sumit found work in a small tech company, where he was respected for his skills and dedication. For the first time, he felt capable of providing for both himself and Jenny without fear of family interference. Australia also offered them moments of joy they hadn't felt in years. They explored the coastlines, hiked through forests, and celebrated small victories together. Jenny learned to surf, laughed at her early failures, and discovered a freedom that had been denied to her in India. Sumit discovered the delight of simple pleasures, morning coffee by the beach, watching the sunset, and the quiet comfort of a life not dictated by obligation. Most importantly, their love grew stronger. The constant threat of family pressure had once overshadowed their relationship. In Australia, without the weight of judgment and hostility, they could simply be together. They learned to communicate more honestly, to support one another without fear, and to dream freely. The sacrifices they had made, the house, the possessions, the homeland, were not losses anymore. They were the price of a love that had survived betrayal, hostility, and impossible choices. Yet even in happiness, they never forgot the lessons of the past. Sumit remained cautious, aware that family ties and tradition could still influence his life in ways they could not control. Jenny remained empathetic, remembering